All right,
I want to call the meeting to order. Welcome this afternoon. This is a Commons meeting of the Lincoln City Council and the Lancaster County Board of Commissioners. Thanks for being here, everyone. We have a short agenda, a couple of things that we need to talk about of common interest to us today. And so we will begin. We need to do the roll call, correct?
Okay.
Okay.
Amundson.
Yes.
Hudkins.
Yes.
Rabel. Shore. And Smoyer.
Yes.
Camp.
Yes.
Christensen.
Yes.
Emery.
Yes.
Eskridge.
Yes.
Gaylor Baird. Yes. Fellers.
Yes.
Thank you. And the Open Meetings Act is posted in the back of the room if that's necessary. Let's begin by first item of business is the Railroad Transportation Safety District fiscal year 2014-15 budget, et cetera. Mr. Feigart.
Good afternoon, members of Common. I did hand out, you each have 3 sheets. Those are consistent with the current year fiscal year budget that the RTSD approved. Attached with that is a 12-year CIP that the board was presented as part of the budget presentation. And then the third sheet is a cash flow showing 2 different levies, a 1.3 cent levy and a 2.6 cent levy. And the whole purpose of my conversation, I guess, during the RTSD board meeting and then later, Larry Gaylord Baird asked me to update the rest of the city council on a Monday afternoon, was to suggest that the RTSD has a budget. We have a projected CIP of projects that are important or that we have been recommended to the board to do in the future. 2 significant ones of those being the South Beltway and the project at 33rd, 35th and Adams. And that with the levy that was approved by the county board, that with the 1.3 cent levy and the CIP laid out the way it was, that you couldn't afford to fund both of those. You could with the 2.6. So for and while the RTSD doesn't approve a 6-year CIP, clearly that document was the planning document. And my comment was that if the 1.3 levy is perpetuated and moves on to the future, that decision makers in the community would need to make some decisions between those projects that were shown in the CIP, because we couldn't do them both the way they're currently shown. So I guess the other thing I would say simply is if one of you were going to ask, well, which is the priority, they both are. As the executive director of the RTSD, I think the 33rd, 35th, and Adams is the higher priority for trying to improve safety and reduce conflicts between cars and trains. 1.2 million plus or minus cars and trains are affected every day on that corridor. That's the highest highest location across the state for the number of vehicles times the number of trains. So it would rank very high at the state in their priorities. As a city engineer and looking at the CIP for the city, clearly trying to get something done with the South Beltway and having the RTSD support that makes that a priority. So I have a left hand and a right hand here today. I think they're both very important. And we'll try to answer any questions that anybody has. Yes, Roman.
Do you have any count on the number of vehicular accidents or deaths that have occurred at this particular, at 33rd to 35th in Adams?
I would have. I do not have that information with me here today.
Okay, because we do know what happens on Highway 2, which, you know, makes the South Beltway really a high priority. But I would be interested in knowing that about the 33rd, 35th, and Adams.
Okay.
To follow up on that, have we had, can you think of how many tragedies or fatalities?
And one this year already.
Mm-hmm.
How do we need?
Well, we don't need any, but I just mean, what's
I wanna make sure that
but
I'm
I
sure that anyone's
the people in Northeast
Yeah.
would like not to see it.
I mean, that's not the issue, but I just was wondering if
Sure.
you understood, if we knew what the count was, because I think that that's one of the things that we always have to enter in what the danger aspects are.
Doug?
Okay, so we got 1.2 million potential accidents every day. So that isn't statistics enough to say, hey, we have a need here? Is that what you're telling me?
No, I was curious, just simply, is that okay to be curious?
It's okay to be curious. It's
And I
not
don't
to-
think
To
that-
say that we don't know on one, but we know on the South Beltway, and that makes it much more viable. I'm not gonna,
Yeah, because
won't accept that.
I do happen to know that we
Yeah,
have
and-
17 accidents or whatever, 11 whatever,
Yeah.
and I myself have driven daily, 2-3 times a day, on Highway 2, and I do know what the fatalities are, and I do also know what the statistics are, et cetera, et cetera. I am aware of that, but I don't know, and so I am just asking for
I can't get out of
information.
Havelock unless I use Cornhusker, so I use
Right.
Cornhusker kind of
Sure.
every day too, so.
Yeah,
I think there's plenty of stuff to go around. There's needs in both areas, that's all I wanted.
Larry?
Certainly, there are needs on both areas, and I guess I would like to see, since we put the crossing for where people can't turn around within, we've improved those crossings. Has the rate of accidents decreased in that area? That's the first question, and I'll have another one.
And have to check, at 35th and Adams, we have a wayside horn, so there were no other medians or physical pertinences put there to restrict traffic, because we'd had to close a couple of streets and really affected their access. So whether or not we've seen a reduction at 33rd or at 70th or at 44th, that's kind of hard to predict. I can look back at all the crashes. I would tell you clearly from my perspective, if you drive out there and you see a 9-inch curb and up and the gate is down, for somebody to physically turn and bounce over that curb, that's a pretty willful violation of the rules of the road. So, but I could try to do a little bit more looking at that as well, Larry.
Well, I think that was a tremendous improvement. I take that 33rd quite often for meetings at East Campus. And I know since the stakes were put in there and the curb in there, you used to see people get nervous and try to cut across when they'd see a train coming pretty slow and whatnot. And I think with the gates there and those center medians raised up, at least I haven't observed anybody doing that in recent times. So I think that was a great improvement. But we still need to work on it and find a way to take those Adams Street and 33rd and get it across Cornhusker Highway. Now, we were pretty insistent, and I have been on the district for a couple of years, on providing enough study money to come up with a workable plan to address those intersections and get that traffic across Cornhusker Highway. Do you have adequate money for planning and to do those studies and keep coming up with a plan, maybe, something a little bit more that we can agree on? Because I don't think there's any question that we need to address that area, but maybe we just haven't found the right fix for it yet.
Well, certainly, there's $500,000 in this year's budget of the RTSD to start the planning, to go back and revisit what was done in the environmental document, looking at all the alternatives that were done as part of that far north end of the Antelope Valley project. Well, there's enough to continue. It's going to depend on what we do with the levy later on. But at this point, we're still in the process of writing an RFP and trying to decide exactly what that study all should include. Clearly, there isn't a defined project with a solution at this point.
And there should be. We want it to be an open study to take a look at it, and if there's a way to get that traffic from Adams and 33rd across Cornhusker Highway and could get clear through to Superior Street, then you wouldn't have so much going on down Cornhusker Highway to 27th. But those engineers and traffic engineers just have to take a look at it and see what makes sense. But the county board is solely and unanimously behind both projects. We feel that Highway 2 is probably the one that has cleared the most hurdles and probably will go forward the first, but there will be funding for both of them. And there's clearly enough funding through 2017-18. And we had hoped to be able to increase and, and put a higher percentage of our budget back into the railroad safety transportation this year. Unfortunately, we were hit with another 17% increase in farmland values, and they were the ones that were carrying the load in Lancaster County too. That after our farmers have suffered a 48% increase in their actual taxes, not just their valuations, a 42%, and next year this year that we just budgeted for, another 17%, even though we appealed out the state of Nebraska, but the ag land sales were that strong, not the income, but the sales were. So we've had a tremendous increase in those taxes. I dare say if most city residents would have had an actual increase of 50% in their taxes, we would have had demonstrations around the courthouse. But we are committed to raising that, and we had hoped to do it this year. We didn't do it this year. My prediction is that we will raise that levy back up next year, even if we have to increase property taxes to do it. We are committed to the funding, and so, but we want to make sure that there are enough funds to do everything that's scheduled to be done, at least through 2017-18.
Is there
Well, I
a
think
question there, Larry? Okay.
I think we'd have to be
Well,
careful.
we've been tired of reading the paper and don't always get both sides of the story, so we want to make sure that people watching this can see it.
If we spend according to the dollars that are shown in the CIP, yes, it goes red in that year out there around 17, 18. But you can't spend there, and then even if at that point you put in 2.6, everything from there on is gonna have to be delayed to catch back up. So. now
My
what-
question was, is there enough money to fund everything that's scheduled slated through 2016-17?
Yes, but then in
Okay, that's
18,
what I wanted-
19, and
I know,
19, 20, the 4 million left
If
for.
we start funding more
Okay.
next year, you won't show the deficit that's being shown in red here. If we start picking it up.
That is correct.
Okay.
The deficit will move down a little bit. Okay. The other thing, just in case anybody's listening, to make sure that it's crystal clear, you referenced going north of Cornhusker. The RTSD's primary mission responsibility has to do with railroads and those crossings, and any proposed project there probably needs to quit at Cornhusker. It needs to connect up the connections coming over at Adams. We certainly couldn't spend RTSD money going north from
We know
there.
that,
But it
but
would
if
set
that-
the stage then for the city to have a reduced CIP obligation in the future.
But as we're planning this crossing over Cornhusker or whatever we do there, we should know where we're going in the future so that we can design it to the maximum capability.
The RTSD will make sure that anything that they do is consistent with the long-range plan of the city and not waste those dollars.
Okay. John, then
Yeah,
Brett.
a couple questions, Roger. First of all, on the costs here of these two projects, what, over this 10-year period, are you projecting is the total for South Beltway?
Right at 14 million. I think I took 14 million, divided it by 6, and that is 2.167 each year. Those are probably a couple years old by the time the Beltway gets done. There's probably gonna be some inflation out there, but that's the estimated, $14 million was the estimated cost we got from IndyOR for the bridges over the railroad tracks at the east and the west ends of the South Beltway.
And for the 33rd, 35th crossing, you've got it here in 10 years. I know we had proposals a year or so ago, but could you tell us, is this the total in the 10 year, or is that just 10 years funding of it? And how much is that?
Well, the goal would be, the way this was laid out, would be to finish it in 25, 26, 10 years. The overall total project cost is between 65 and 70 million dollars. If you add this line across here, that doesn't add up to 65 or 70. The perception, the proposal that I was putting forward was that the RTSD needed to do the planning and the environmental document if we had a viable project, pay for 100% of that. If you have a viable project, at that point, you go back to IndyOR, the railroads, and anyone else, and the proposal on the table was to buy right away and build it. It would be 50% funded by the RTSD and the other 50% coming from IndyOR and the railroads.
Okay, yeah, and this is still 46 million on the line you had there. And we had those proposals that were like 2 giant roundabouts or whatever. Are we backing off, or, I mean, is it really still gonna be a 65 to 70 million solution? Because I'm trying to
We haven't
remember.
done the planning, John. That was the concept that was put out. I thought it had merit for discussion, and about 2.5 years ago in the spring, we had a major stakeholder meeting to just let people know that we were thinking about something, and that was a concept. I still have that drawing. I tell folks that was a concept. It has to be proven. At this point, I couldn't tell you whether it would go up or down and change until the process has gone through.
Do you think, with your engineering background and all, that there may be some options that would be less than that 65 to 70 million?
It's possible. The other thing that has caused me some concern about the timing is the city has a master plan for Dead Man's Run. And the NRD and the Corps of Engineers have already embarked on a feasibility. I probably will get this wrong, whether it's a feasibility study, but the Corps has approved some funding to start working on Dead Man's Run. We clearly wouldn't want to miss an opportunity if they're coming in and improving parts of Dead Man Run. That includes the bridge under Cornhusker Highway, the railroad bridge, the bridge back over at 33rd Street. There's a missing trail pedestrian component in the area that clearly perhaps could be made part of a flood control project or built along. If we could do roadways that parallel channels and fit together and share cost, maybe the cost can go down as well, John. And every so often, engineers are coming up with new kinds of intersection designs that are better. When we did the Antelope Valley study, it was a big 4-way intersection with a traffic signal at that location generally. And since then, we've come up with other ideas. The state, I wouldn't want to suggest we're going to build a diverging diamond or anything like that, but maybe there are some tweaks, and maybe there's a intermediate project that gets the bridge built, gets folks over to Cornhusker, but the footprint is still there for more of a transportation corridor someday when the city would move ahead.
Now, on your third sheet here, and you presented to city council, would you go through your assumptions again? One exactly, you said you
In the cash
revised.
flow?
Yes.
Okay.
You said you
It's very
revised
simple.
it since we saw it, or?
No, it is consistent with where we are today. The top one, obviously, we had a 13-cent, 1.3-cent levy in 14. So I just said if we stick at 1.3, I run the 1.3 levy all the way out to the end of the 12 years. I plugged in the operating expenses and the capital projects just the way they're shown on this sheet. Then down in the one down below, previous sheets in 2014, I had 2.6 in there. Now that we know the county has given the board 1.3, I updated this sheet to reflect the 1.3 cents in 14 and 15, and then I went back to 2.6 from there on.
Well, my question though too is, you have at the top assumptions, you said 1% annual valuation growth, I appreciate that.
Those come strictly from the county treasurer and assessor. I defer clearly to the county on what those assumptions should be. They may be conservative, I don't know.
No, I'm just asking to
Oh.
be sure. But and then you said 0.5% average interest rate. Would you please explain that?
Well, we have the money invested because, again, the RTSD typically collects the money, comes in property tax, and then it's invested by the county treasurer. And I think the interest rates that they're drawing on that is only about 0.5%.
Well, we're looking at 12 years. Is there some way that there could be some other investments to maybe get at least 1% or so?
We need to visit with county treasurer. By state statute, he is the financial officer for the RTSD. And I would like to think that whatever cash they've got, and we recently went through an exercise in which all of the money in the investments in the RTSD are being handled in the same manner as the rest of the county to get better investments, to have more money placed where it's paying better. But I'm not a very good one to answer that question, I'm sorry.
I would just hope that, even getting some 12 to 24 month instruments of, that you can get over 1%. And so that would double that, and I'm not sure how that would factor in your projections. And then you have a 3% annual increase in operating expenses, and to define that a little bit more precisely, please.
That's just trying to take cost of living and whatnot going up. I think if we went back and looked at the history, our operating budget for this year, as approved, was $90,000. It's not a big number. Our actual last year was around 52.5. So we're talking $50,000 to $80,000, and chances are, most years, those operating expenses are a little smaller than what's here.
What was the reason it jumped so much this year?
Typically, we've been in that 80 to 90 range, and then for the budget, and then if it's gone down, then I try to analyze and go from there.
My final question is, and it goes back on the 33rd project there on the railroad. You know, we all agree on the importance, and I guess I question though the dollar projection you have on that. And if you could chop 20 million off that, there's no problem, even if the county were to go at 1.3 levy. And I part of me wants to at least give some deference to not totally put our colleagues behind the 8 ball here. I would hope that maybe over time, and I used to be on RTSD too, that we can gradually get more of these done and help the taxpayers in lowering it. But these are 2 major projects, and it just seems like with the wherewithal we have and engineering talents, new developments, and the same on the South Beltway, I hope we can contain costs there. The idea is to get those projects done and safely. But I was just amazed when you presented those concept designs a year or 2 ago. It just seemed enormous.
They're pretty standard, industry standard. There's a fair bit of right-of-way. There's between $15 and $20 million worth of right-of-way that would probably need to be required for this project if you come over and parallel the track. Nothing is worse than underestimating and starting on a project and then coming back regularly to the financial board saying, oh, I'm sorry, we underestimated this. But you know, we get through a planning document, and if there's a feasible project, then you would go from using planning numbers to actual better engineering estimates, because you kind of have a defined project and you're able to better quantify that, and the numbers could go down or go up. We certainly understand we want to save every dollar and spend the least amount possible. But what I don't want to do is tell folks that this is a $40 or $50 million project, and then we get through the planning saying, oh, by the way, this is $75 million. And when the estimate, because the RTSD collects the money as it goes, if those numbers go down, we're always in a position to adjust the CIP or the budget or the levy up or down and not take any more money than what we need.
Could we maybe label this projection kind of as a worst case scenario then?
For the 70 million?
Or your 3rd page? Can we just put on their worst case scenario?
You can choose to if you want to. I don't know that that would be a worst case until we actually finish the planning stuff, John. Probably it's a worst case in the revenue because it projects 1.3 cents all the way through, and we're hoping that that would come in. But if you're asking me, is this a worst case on the proposed CIP being just under $71 million in total over that time frame, I wouldn't be comfortable saying that. I think it's a good estimate as a planning document.
Brent?
Actually, mine was more of a tangential question, which I'm sure we could probably cover after the meeting. I just was going to ask the general timeline for kind of having the RFP finished for 33rd and 35th, like where you were possibly seeing that moving. And again, if that's going to take too much time, I know we've got a lot of other things to cover.
I can say it very quickly. I think by the end of the year, we hope that their RFP would be out. We discussed at the last board meeting having a couple of members from the RTSD on that selection committee, and Chris Humphrey and City Engineering is leading that effort. Okay.
It'd be nice to actually have some solid numbers and a solid plan when it's all said and done, so appreciate it. Thanks.
Okay. Larry?
And just on behalf of John Henry's Plumbing and Prairie Broders, the chairman of the Grain Terminals Association, they'd like to be involved in a steering committee or something there because we have 6 major grain terminals in Lincoln, Nebraska. multi-millions of dollars of grain transports there. And since the roundabout's been put in at 14th and Superior, we do not see any grain trucks going through there anymore, mine included. So that's one of the major concerns about the proposed plan. And there has to be a way to get those grain trucks to be able to have a route or a way that they can negotiate in and out of those grain terminals.
I've been criticized in the past of maybe not taking exception to your comments about grain trucks, so maybe today is the time to do that. Clearly, roundabouts are designed for full-size semis, fire trucks, and buses. If we have folks in the community that are uncomfortable in driving them, maybe we need to beef up our education. In a roundabout, when a truck goes through that, they're going to dogtail over into the other lane. The driver's manual clearly states that folks are not supposed to run alongside a truck going through that. You can go to any intersection in Lincoln today. 48th and O is one of our largest ones. Any truck turning the corner uses all 2 or 3 lanes when they turn to go. So they can and they are designed. If we have folks reluctant to use them, I'm sorry. We have met with John Henry's. Mike Lang and I went out and talked to the new owners of the grain elevator the other day. I've also met with B&J Motors, Speedway Motors, because they own some property on to the west of that. Clearly, there would be a large outreach to everyone that would significantly be affected by that, Larry.
Have you driven a semi through 14th and Superior? Because of the curvature of it, I refuse to take my trucks through there, and I do not know anybody from the Raymond, Valparaiso, Davie area that's going through there anymore. One time's enough.
I don't have a CDL,
for
so I
us.
can't drive yours.
Okay. You're welcome to ride with us anytime you like.
Other questions? Roger, thanks for coming here. Obviously, as you mentioned at the beginning, these are both very, very important projects to the community. Those of us that represent North Lincoln are very aware of the dangers of both of these intersections with the roads and railroads and those areas. I mean, it's very common when you're stopped for a train and you see one coming from the east or the west. As soon as it's by, then boom, there's one coming from the opposite direction, and they're angled, and so you're always having to look way over your shoulder to make sure what's coming or not coming. So it is a very bad and dangerous situation. We hear in the news this last week of oil that's being transported down there, and of course any train's not going to be good for a vehicle, but that just creates more of a danger in terms of the consequences of what were to happen.
Maybe the other thing we don't speak about very often is just thinking about the delay, the congestion, and the frustration of the drivers. With the recession over, the trains are running more, and every day or every week as that train traffic picks up, we've got folks that are sitting and waiting because they simply can't get through those 2 areas. So that's another reason to be thinking about our current comp plan suggests we ought to have grade separations on the mainline tracks and our arterial streets just to help folks get through and not have to sit and idle.
Thank you, Roger.
Thank you.
Our second item, then, we will have a conversation, another lively conversation about the 9/11 radio upgrade, and Director Cassidy and Chief Deputy Bleimmeister and Mike Thurber, if you can come up too.
Back in 1987, the city of Lincoln acquired a new radio system. The radio system the city acquired replaced a hodgepodge of radio systems that were being used by various city agencies at the time. The biggest of which was a 4-channel UHF conventional radio system owned by the city that served public safety agencies. Lincoln Police, Lincoln Fire, and Lancaster County Sheriff were all using that system. 1987 was a year that a new technology had become available. We were the first paid customer to buy that technology. It was called EDAX, Enhanced Digital Access Communication System, a product of General Electric that took most of its backbone and logic from the emerging cellular telephone industry. EDEX has been sold several times to since GE first invented it in 1987. It's presently owned by Harris Corporation, which is the world's largest provider of private land mobile radio systems. Most of Harris's business is military around the world. The technology has been sunset. It ceased to be manufactured in 2010 by Harris. The technology has moved on to a newer technology called P25. Harris is ending all support for its EDEX systems in 2017. However, many of the major components of EDEX radio systems are no longer manufactured and no longer available. So despite the fact that there will be at least some vendor support over the next 2 years, if you have a failure in a component that's no longer manufactured, you're out looking for one on the used market for the most part. We've maintained our system very well over the past 27 years. It's had 2 significant upgrades to hardware in the early 1990s and the mid-1990s, and we've kept current on all software upgrades. We pay a considerable amount of money to Harris every year to continue to have access to our license to use the technology. We're one of about 500 large EDEX systems worldwide, and all of those systems are going through the same thing. Either they've already made the transition to P25 or they're in the process of doing so. It's a critical piece of infrastructure for the city. We depend on it tens of millions of times annually. It's the communications backbone for all the public safety agencies. In addition, it's used by a few other non-public safety agencies, the largest of which would be the City of Lincoln Public Works Department. There are a little less than 2,400 radios on the EDEX system. 2/3 of those radios are owned by the City of Lincoln. The other third are owned by non-city enterprises, chief among which are Lancaster County and the University of Nebraska. The non-city agencies were all invited to come onto the radio system, and they were invited for 2 reasons. First, from an operational standpoint, it was in the city's benefit to have other public safety agencies like the Sheriff's Office and the Airport Authority Police, the FBI, and others on the same radio network. And second, we invited other agencies to come onto the radio system because we had capacity and it allowed us to spread the annual operating costs out against a larger user base. All the users have paid their fair share to the penny of the annual cost of operating and maintaining the radio system, including such things as radio repairs, licensing, software updates and upgrades, personnel costs, and so forth are associated with owning and operating this radio system. That cost sharing is done by charging a per radio per year fee. Where we're at is we've got a fairly short window of opportunity to replace this radio system before we're really out on a limb with absolutely no vendor support. And it's my #1 public safety priority. I've been telling people that for years. We've had this on the radar for the city's capital improvement program since 2005. We've known for years that EDEX was going to sunset. We've been trying to prepare for this day. Last year, we hired a consultant, Ellert and Associates from Stillwater, Minnesota. This is a firm that specializes in providing advice and consultation to cities regarding mobile radio systems. We hired Ellert because we wanted to get some more precise ideas of how much money we might need. And Ellert worked last year to study the system and to provide us with a range of cost projections that ran from a low of $22.8 million to a high of $30.4 million. We're hoping that we're able to move forward with funding for the radio system replacement sometime during 2015. The mayor has appointed a committee to provide advice on whether the committee agrees with the need, and if so, what options the committee recommends for funding the radio system replacement. I've been asked to chair that committee. And I hope to have our work done by the end of the year, so that we can present our elected officials with our recommendations. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions for John? John?
Thank you, Director Cassie. We've got two other groups here. I guess the two of you could help us understand a little bit about your needs and what you see as the future needs, and any other agencies or whatever that you know that would just help us ascertain how we can broaden the cost of all of this.
Well, the Sheriff's Office has approximately 160 radios. We are one of the users that Public Safety Director Cassidy spoke about. And we pay that maintenance fee to Ray Ryan and his associates with radio maintenance. And I have to say that they've done a tremendous job throughout my career. Basically, when we key our radios, they work. And they install the radios for us in our new cruisers and help us take them out, the upgrades and things that Chief Cassidy talked about. So from our perspective, there's a tremendous benefit also of being on the same radio system as the Lincoln Police Department. We work side by side, out of the same building, many of the same calls. And we hope that we can assist in finding a viable funding option for the upgrade. I can attest that Chief Cassidy and Sheriff Wagner, we've met on multiple occasions throughout this process. One difference for the Sheriff's Office is that for at least the past 10 years, if not possibly the last 12 years, we have set aside money knowing that this upgrade is coming. Now, this money is specifically for end user equipment, so the radios that we wear on a belt or have in our cruisers. Based on current projections, worst case scenario, we have approximately half of the amount of money we would need to completely replace the user equipment.
And how much is that?
Worst case estimates is about 1.2, 1.3 million, and so we've accumulated approximately 615,000.
How about the county corrections?
Well, thank you for having me here. We're really a new actor in with the ability to use the ADEC. And again, I'd echo the same thing. Ray was very helpful in placing of the jail, putting the antennas in, and making some decisions. We operate about 150 radios, but in our situation, our mission, being able to communicate inside the building is critical, and that's how we based our whole ideal of radio system. So what we did was actually go on the trunking system, the 800 megahertz, and operate just inside the building with that. 30 of our radios, however, are on the EDAC system. And as discussed earlier in some of the previous meetings, is depending on the system that they go to in the P25, those 30 radios could be software upgraded to join that system. We only use those radios when we leave the building and are on transports going to medical, being able to communicate with law enforcement, because for the first 20 years of my career, we were on a separate low-band UHF frequency system that worked very well, but as time has changed with Homeland Security narrowing the band, our radio system probably would not be viable in the next 3 or 4 years. So working with Ray in the shop, the ideal was let's split our radio system and use the EDAC when we leave the building. So it's not used as much as, say, both on our sides of the law enforcement, but we are part of that community. So it's nice to be at the table to find out what that might cost us to maintain those 30 radios. But I would think that's what it would take for us to maintain into the future. Or do we need to go off and go back to just a trunking system and not have the connectivity with law enforcement? That would be another decision that the county board we would have to talk about, if that would be kind of a step backward, or would it be something that we could afford to go on in the future. I know we've had some increased costs in our IS business in the last the week receiving that, and so we want to always be mindful of what our budget, because we are the largest budget for the county board right now, and so we have to be mindful of what that mushrooms out, and if it really does meet our mission. But right now we're on, and we appreciate Ray's help. They work on all of our radios. And that's also a very good help, so we're not repeating that or going in to try to find someone that can work on our equipment. But I think that's been a good partnership so far, and we're just into it now a year, and I think it's working for us at this moment.
What you said then, that we've got the current, we're on a VHF system now, is that right, on the EDAX, or does that have both 800?
No, EDEX is an 800 megahertz trunked radio technology. So we're on 800 megahertz trunked radio technology. We have a few organizations, the rural fire departments, the jail, the youth detention center, Lincoln Public Schools, that operate on 800 megahertz conventional as well as trunked. But what we're replacing is the 800 megahertz trunked EDEX radio system.
And so we'd also be going to an 800 megahertz, is that correct? I mean, I'm trying to remember the briefings you've given us before, because I was trying to understand the difference between the VHF and the 800 megahertz.
Ellert and Associates has recommended 3 different options. The one that they are, their primary recommendation is a blended system which would combine 800 megahertz trunked and VHF trunked. Whether we would go with that system or not is highly dependent on what we get back from our vendors. And you know, we'll have some decisions. Chief Blymeister and Sheriff Wagner and I met about one of those recently. That's going to be a decision point that primarily affects the sheriff's office. So we're going to have to see what we get back from our vendors before I can tell you whether we're going to go with a blended VHF and 800 trunked system, or whether we're going to do 800 trunked alone.
Would you review which one goes for buildings better?
Yes.
It sounds like the jails have that challenge, whereas maybe the sheriff out in the county is.
Well, nothing goes through the jail.
Oh.
That's a good sign.
I'm sorry, not radio waves, I'm sorry, not the other objects.
We have a little bit of capacity for radio coverage inside the jail with something called BDA, bidirectional amplifiers, so that our deputies and our police officers that are there on business in the intake center at least have radio communications. But the jail's one of those buildings that you're never going to have reliable indoor coverage throughout the building. And there are others. I mean, you're never going to be able to talk in the morgue at the hospital. Morgues are always in basements for some reason. But 800 megahertz, that radio frequency, it's much more line of sight, and yet it penetrates buildings better. The signal stays together better in a building. It's the frequency of choice in a built urban environment worldwide. VHF, on the other hand, is more appropriate for outdoor mobile radio coverage. A mobile radio is one that's mounted in a vehicle rather than a portable radio that's carried on a belt, and especially in rural areas where you have a lot of geography to cover and your primary need is outdoor mobile coverage. And we're in an environment here in Lancaster County where our primary need is more urban, metropolitan, built environment, building penetration, but we also have some need for outdoor mobile coverage. So that's the reason that Ellert and Associates is recommending that we strongly consider a dual band network that would provide both VHF trunked and 800 megahertz trunked.
Just a quick side question. Why, and pardon my lack of understanding of all this, but why would you just go with 800 megahertz on everything? Would that not work for the sheriff's department on the road, or am I missing something?
It might.
Or don't have the distance, or help me out, please.
Yeah, well, 800 megahertz does not travel quite as well as VHF. It's more point to point. So if you can't see the top of the tower, your chances of getting a signal, a usable signal, is not as great. VHF, on the other hand, propagates in a different way. It goes further and to some extent follows the curvature of the earth a bit. So you can put up 2 sites of VHF in Lancaster County and pretty much have outdoor mobile coverage countywide. To do the same with 800 only would require many more sites. Sites are expensive.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I noticed that Jim David Saber is back there, How does this, would you be working, what type of communications do you use within the Lancaster Emergency Management?
Correct. And primarily, it's support of the rurals, which is now on the conventional system. So my stand in this as the Director of Emergency Management is just to make sure we have effective means of communication throughout the county. And if it's partnering with the city to bolster the system that's in place so we can ensure countywide safety, I think those are the points that Chief Deputy Blymeister has addressed.
Now, Lancaster County Emergency Management has 85 EDEX radios, 3.67% of the total.
And so would those be replaced then? Is that what the deal is?
I'm not positive. We haven't allowed anyone in the past several years to buy a radio unless it was software upgradable to P25. So, for example, all the radios the jail acquired, they're all software upgradable to P25, the new standard. One of the nice things about the P25 standard is it's vendor agnostic. You can buy your radio from Kenwood, you can buy it from E.F. Johnson, you can buy it from Motorola, you can buy it from Harris. One or two others that I'm forgetting. And I'm just not sure, Jim, when all of your radios are required and if any of them are P25 upgradable or not. I just don't know.
And that's something, too, we would defer to the individual rural fire departments.
Okay.
Again, to ensure that they're properly prepared or they're planning to the future. So if they buy something today, it's compatible with those next few steps down the road.
The rural fire departments run from a maximum of 3 EDEX radios at Southwest to a minimum of 1. Several of the rural fire districts have a single EDEX radio.
So that would behoove the county, the rural fire departments and the rural law enforcement and so forth to ensure that their radios are compatible and so forth in the future.
We're all compatible now. We can all communicate with one another when we need to.
I know, but I mean in the future, if you go to this P25 system.
And we'll be doing the same thing. I mean, all of the options that we're considering all retain, at the bare minimum, our current operability.
Okay.
And a couple of the options improve that quite a bit with other non-city, non-county, non-Lincoln area agencies.
Other questions, John? Could you gentlemen discuss a little bit about the state's radio system, and then I think Mr. Cassidy's also talked about OPPD, and Douglas County has a system, and potentially interfaces, or just give us some guidance on if that's a possibility or what the ramifications are.
Well, we've had some discussions with the state, one that I can think of, regarding movement towards their VHF trunked 800 megahertz system.
So they have a blended system?
They do not.
No.
Straight 800 truck?
No, they're straight VHF.
Straight
VHF, so.
On the highway patrol?
That's correct.
Yeah, because if they have the longer distance, then, right?
But as far as the discussions of movement away from the current operability, although we'll consider that, what is functional right now, it serves us very well. So we have no plans specifically to move away from that system. However, with the P25 compatibility, we do have people that travel across the state and actually across the nation to transport prisoners back and forth on extraditions. That would be one of the upsides of being able to piggyback or partner with the state system to a degree. With that, I don't have the in-depth understanding that Chief Cassidy has of what the cost would be to that right now.
And John, to answer your question, in our mission, we do not need to be chatting with the state or maybe other correctional facilities in the city. Our biggest thing is when we leave the building with an inmate, we need to be able to talk through maybe at the hospital, maybe at an appointment, being able to communicate with law enforcement at that time has been a plus. Do we have to do it? No, but that, I think it's upgraded our ability to communicate. But I don't think, to answer your question on needing state connectivity for our facility, I don't think the board, we'd have to ask the board for that.
Do you gentlemen see other opportunities here to help spread the costs, whether it be capital and or operating, to other users? Do you see increased use yourselves? Of course, the county, I guess you do to the Chris.
Yeah, we start all the way from the beginning. Just we'll watch costs, but I don't know if there's anybody else to expand to. I think Tom's probably ask everybody around that's been in it, because I know some of the meetings had a lot of other people that I've not seen at the table regarding radios.
I think as we evaluate, we can just understand if there are others that could participate, that just help smooth the cost out on a broader basis.
And that's exactly what I've done, what we've done with our current EDAX radio network, is we've allowed lots of other users to come on for that very purpose. And my belief is that you should do that. I mean, we're going to build it anyway. We have to have it. We might as well invite other users to use that system at a reasonable price that's attractive to them, because our fixed costs are pretty much the same, whether those additional users are there or not. And if we can spread those fixed costs over a larger user base, we save money.
Everybody wins.
Other questions? Tom, in one of your other presentations, I don't know that it was you, I think it was one of the other individuals that presented this, talked about the new system's lifespan being 7 to 8 years or something like that. Could you talk about that? That seemed troubling to me.
I think the answer that Ellard and Associates gave to that was their projection on how long it would be before we have to do a significant upgrade. Okay. And that upgrade would probably be a new release of software, a major new release. As you know, some of your software updates are part of what you paid for the original product. You buy an app on your smartphone, you get the new updates automatically, but every now and then Microsoft comes along and says, oh, guess what? This new operating system is not going to be distributed for free. This one you're going to have to buy. And that's what Ellard is talking about with that. The hardware, some of the sunk costs for a radio system, towers, sites, concrete, generators, these things last a good long time with proper maintenance. And those are not going to wear out in 8 or 10 years. But we can expect that there will be plateaus that we hit where we're going to have to do a significant upgrade, just like we have with our current radio system. Now, what we would like to do is make the decision on proposals to based on a total cost of ownership. So when we get proposals from anywhere from 2 to 5 vendors to provide us with a radio system, we want to look at what the total cost of ownership is, not just the purchase price, but also the annual cost of maintenance and licensing. And that's got to be a very important part of the calculation when we're making a decision on which one to accept. Douglas County and OPPD have a very large, very mature, over 7,000 radio, 800 megahertz trunk system. They are paying their vendor a larger amount for annual licensing so that those future upgrades are included in the licensing. And that's something that I think would be very much worth considering when we're entering into negotiations with a vendor.
Would we know how long we would have until we would have to make a substantial software upgrade like that through how we would bid out the RFP, as far as maybe, we're going to pay a licensing agreement for 7 or 8 years in the future, or could we get an idea of that when we're doing the bidding so we could select which vendor is correct? Or
that's exactly what we'll be doing.
Okay.
It's just that. I mean, that'll be in our RFP.
So we'll know exactly when we're going to have to expend that money in the future because of what we've said in the RFP.
We will.
That's the answer I'm looking for.
Knock on glass.
Is that the worst case scenario? Just kidding.
Actually, I'll tell you what the worst case scenario is. The worst case scenario is we buy a radio system from a vendor that goes out of business.
Yeah.
But with the demand that's out there, I mean, that's not really a. I mean, I guess I can't speak for how they would do their books, but
I happen to remember when there was a great, big, huge plant at 120th and L in Omaha that said Westinghouse on it. And you thought that is as solid as it comes. And now it's empty, or storage, or something else. So never say never.
isn't the greater risk though just technology? I mean, it's just incredible what we're seeing annually
How
with
fast it's coming.
smartphones and everything else.
Yeah, but
I think it's pretty incredible that we've been able to operate this radio system for 27 years, and it's a tribute to good engineering and really, really good ongoing maintenance. That system was well designed to begin with, and a lot of employees at the City of Lincoln, primarily at the Public Works Department, were responsible for that. And since we became the owner of it, the City of Lincoln Emergency Communications Division's radio shop has just done a fabulous job keeping this thing ticking.
Other questions?
I would just say, since we have some of our partners in the room, I'm very pleased that we have the kind of cooperation across different public entities that we need to keep the public safe. It's critical. We don't want to have any problems as a result of people not being on the same system or having things that don't interweave seamlessly. In these discussions that we've been having about public safety, we've been talking about the cost of the radio system and how we have traditionally charged users for a portion of that maintenance of their radio system, but that we've also given our Director Cassidy direction to look at talking to our partners about building into the cost of the user fees, the upfront cost of this infrastructure itself, spreading it over time so that it's affordable, but also building in that additional cost. And so I just want to make sure that's clear, that we're looking at that, because I think that's what the public's going to demand as we go forward, trying to find a way to pay for this.
Larry?
I guess in response to that, Lauren, are you asking for an upfront cost, or if this project is bonded, that part of the bonding costs be shared by users in proportion to the use of the radios?
I think the committee that's been being put together and will be meeting shortly is going to look at that more specifically, because we don't know what the financing mechanism will be. But I think the idea is that the City of Lincoln is prepared to take on the lion's share of the cost of purchasing this system, but would like to not be the sole purchaser, that we would then extend part of the purchase price across our different users in an attempt at fairness and making it affordable for everyone to use. Is that fair to say?
That's certainly been my recommendation. I want particularly city council members to understand that it is really, really in our benefit to have all these other users on the system.
Help them maintain.
They're helping us pay the annual cost of running this system. If they chose to go off and decided to do something else, we would be absorbing all the cost of annual operating and maintenance. So we invited them so we could spread those costs out. And something I want to do as public safety director is I want to get to the point where we've got an affordable product to offer to the other public safety agencies in particular, because I want them to have an incentive to continue to join us on our radio network, because I think we all benefit from that.
What does Beatrice do?
I don't know. I imagine the Beatrice, I don't know. I think Beatrice is joining the state radio system right now. However, I think they are on their own radio system. Most law enforcement agencies are UHF these days, but I've heard, someone told me that Beatrice was joining the statewide radio system.
And you mentioned you may get several years of the software upgrades or whatever in the initial proposal. Is it possible when you do that, and I know the committee will be discussing this more, but to have it so maybe there's a large sum up front, but then the rest of the contract is, some of it is amortized over, say, 5 years, and that way if you did have an adjustment in operating costs, then that could go to help pay that, and so you'd have to get that upfront cost, not as much. Does that make sense?
You lost me in
Okay, say it's just round number, say it's 20 million for the radio system. And say that instead of paying all 20 million up front, and it would still be staged over a couple of years anyway, I assume, but maybe that because you're trying to build in, or it sounds like you'd like to build in some of that software annual cost, that maybe you pay 15 million up front and the other 5 million is spread over several 5-6 years, and then that way increased operating costs could help pay that part of it with all the users.
Okay. I would imagine that's entirely possible. Both the two largest vendors, Vendor and Motorola, have each approached me to express their willingness to finance the entire thing for us. They're more than willing to make interest. My personal belief is that the gold standard is a AAA municipal bond, which is what we are, and that no one's going to be able to borrow the money any cheaper than we're going to be able to borrow it. So I'm a little bit leery of. I've been fairly deluged by third-party financiers who would love to build and lease back to us a radio system or to loan us the money.
RTSD has money to loan us.
All right. Thank you very much. This concludes our meeting. I guess we should have a motion to adjourn. And
So moved.
Second?
Motion made and seconded. Please call the roll.
Emerson,
Yes.
Hudkins,
Yes.
Smoyer,
Yes.
Camp. Yes. Christensen,
Roy, vote.
Yes.
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 Yes, sorry.
Emery,
Yes, quality stuff.
Gaylor Baird, yes. Fellers.
Yes.
But both of you, just so you know,
Esper, sorry.
Yeah.